I used to think the hardest part of working in the woods would be the cold, or maybe the isolation, the endless days of back-breaking labor, the way the wind cut through your jacket and the rain never seemed to stop. I thought I was ready for all of that. I'd grown up in Vancouver, but I'd spent enough time hiking and camping to think I understood the wild. I was wrong. The hardest part of working at the logging camp in northern British Columbia isn't the cold, or the danger, or the loneliness. It's the rules. And if you break them, you don't just risk your job. You risk everything. My name is Ethan Carter. I took the job at Grady Timber because I needed a fresh start. My life in the city had fallen apart, had a bad breakup, lost my apartment, and couldn't find steady work. When I saw the ad for a logging camp looking for able-bodied workers, room and board included, I jumped at the chance. I figured a few months in the woods would give me time to clear my head and save some money. I had no idea what I was walking into. The camp was a 6-hour drive north of Prince George, then another hour on a muddy logging road that wound through endless forest. By the time the company truck dropped me off, the sun was already low, painting the treetops gold and the shadows long. The camp itself was a cluster of weathered cabins, a mess hall, a tool shed, and a generator shack, all surrounded by towering pines and thick undergrowth. The air smelled of sap, diesel, and wood smoke. A handful of men and women were gathered around a fire pit, their faces lined and tired. They looked up as I approached, sizing me up with the wary caution of people who'd seen too many newcomers come and go. A big man with a gray beard and a battered Carhartt jacket stepped forward and stuck out his hand. "Grady," he said, "I run this place. You must be Carter." I shook his hand, trying to hide my nerves. "Ethan, thanks for having me." He grunted. "We'll see if you're still thanking me in a week. Come on, I'll show you around." He led me through the camp, pointing out the essentials, the mess hall, the bunkhouse, the outhouse. Don't wander off at night, unless you want to get lost. The tool shed. Lock it up when you're done, or you'll regret it. The other workers nodded or grunted as we passed. I caught a few names: Tom, a wiry guy with a haunted look; Sarah, the camp cook, who gave me a tired smile; Mike and Dave, two brothers from Alberta who barely spoke. As we walked, I noticed how everyone kept glancing at the trees, as if expecting something to step out of the shadows. The forest pressed in on all sides, dense and dark, the kind of place where you could get lost in minutes. I shivered, telling myself it was just the cold. Grady stopped in front of the bunkhouse and handed me a battered duffel bag. "Your gear's inside. Dinner's at 6. Don't be late." I nodded, shouldering the bag. "Anything else I should know?" He hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me, his eyes serious. "Read this. Memorize it. And don't let anyone tell you it's just superstition." I unfolded the paper. It was a list, typed in all caps, with a few lines underlined in red ink. Rules for the forest, Grady Timber Camp. Never whistle after dark. Never leave the marked trails. If you hear your name called from the trees, do not answer. If you see a white stag, turn around and go back. Always return to camp before sunset. If you find a tree with red markings, do not touch it. Never sleep outside the cabins. If you hear knocking on your window at night, do not look. If you get lost, stay where you are and wait for help. If you break any of these rules, tell Grady immediately. As I turned to go back inside, I thought I heard something. A faint whistle carried on the breeze. I froze, heart pounding. Was it just the wind? Or was someone out there breaking the first rule? I hurried back into the bunkhouse, locking the door behind me. That night, I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest, the list of rules running through my mind. I told myself it was just nerves, just a new job in a strange place. But deep down, I knew something was wrong in these woods, and I was starting to wonder if I'd made a mistake coming here. The next morning, I woke to the sound of boots thumping on the bunkhouse floor and the smell of coffee drifting in from the mess hall. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the frost on the window, the battered duffel at the foot of my bed, and remembered Grady Timber, northern British Columbia, a camp surrounded by endless forest and a list of rules I still didn't understand. I dressed quickly and joined the others for breakfast. The mood was a little lighter in the daylight, but there was still a tension in the air, a sense that everyone was waiting for something to go wrong. Sarah poured me a mug of coffee and slid a plate of eggs and toast across the counter. "Sleep okay?" she asked, her voice low. "Yeah," I lied. "Just getting used to the place." She gave me a knowing look. "You'll get used to it. Or you won't." After breakfast, Grady gathered us by the tool shed. He handed out assignments: felling, limboing, hauling, marking trees for the next day's cut. I was paired with Tom, who seemed relieved to have a partner who listened more than he talked. We spent the morning working a section of old growth, the trees so tall and thick they blocked out most of the sky. The chainsaws roared, the air filled with the scent of sap and sawdust. It was hard, honest work, and for a while, I lost myself in the rhythm of it. But even in the daylight, the forest felt off. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence between the saws heavier. Every so often, I'd catch Tom glancing over his shoulder, eyes scanning the trees. At lunch, we sat on a fallen log, eating sandwiches and drinking water from battered thermoses. I pulled out the list of rules, smoothing the creases with my thumb. "Do you really believe all this?" I asked Tom, keeping my voice low. He didn't answer right away. "I've been here 3 years," he said finally. "Longer than most. I've seen things I can't explain, heard things I wish I could forget. The rules, they're not just for show." I waited, hoping he'd say more, but he just stared into the trees, lost in thought. That afternoon, we marked trees for the next day's cut. Grady was strict about staying on the marked trails, bright orange ribbons tied to branches every few yards. "If you get turned around, follow the ribbons back to camp," he'd said. "Don't try to cut through. The forest doesn't like shortcuts." I thought it was just a way to keep us from getting lost, but as the day wore on, I started to understand. The woods were a maze, every tree and rock looking the same. It would be easy to wander off and never find your way back. As the sun dipped lower, Tom grew more anxious. "We need to head back," he said, glancing at his watch. "Grady doesn't like anyone out after dark." We packed up our gear and followed the trail of ribbons back to camp. The sky was already turning pink and gold, the shadows stretching long across the ground. I felt a strange sense of relief as the cabins came into view, smoke rising from the mess hall chimney. That night, after dinner, the crew gathered around the fire pit. Someone passed around a bottle of whiskey, and the story started. Tales of close calls with falling trees, near misses with bears, the time a storm took out the generator for 3 days. But as the fire burned lower, the stories changed. "Last winter," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we lost a guy. The new kid didn't last a week. Said he heard someone calling his name from the woods. Went out after dark to check. Never saw him again." Sarah shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. "It's not just the cold that gets you out here. The forest, it remembers." Tom nodded. "You hear your name, you keep walking. Don't answer. Don't even look." I tried to laugh it off, but the fear in their eyes was real. I thought about the list of rules, the way Grady had looked at me when he handed it over. Maybe it wasn't just superstition. Later, as I lay in my bunk, I heard something outside, a soft, rhythmic knocking, like someone tapping on the window. I froze, remembering Rule 8. If you hear knocking on your window at night, do not look. My heart pounded in my chest. I pulled the blanket over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, counting the seconds until the sound stopped. Eventually, it did, fading into the wind. The next morning, I found muddy footprints outside the bunkhouse window. They were too big to be a raccoon, too human to be a bear. I didn't mention it to anyone. The days settled into a routine: work, eat, sleep, repeat. The rules became second nature. I never whistled after dark, never left the marked trails, never answered when I heard my name whispered from the trees. Sometimes, I'd catch glimpses of something white moving through the woods, a flash of antlers, a shape slipping between the trunks. I always turned around and went back, just like the rules said. One afternoon, a new guy arrived, Jake, fresh out of high school, cocky and restless. He laughed at the rules, calling them old lumberjack fairy tales. The rest of the crew ignored him, but I saw the way Grady watched him, eyes hard. That night, Jake whistled as he walked back from the outhouse, a high, mocking tune that echoed through the camp. The fire went out, the crew fell silent. Grady stood up, his face pale. "Get inside," he said. "Now." We hurried into the bunkhouse, locking the door behind us. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I heard something moving in the trees, something big, moving fast. Jake tried to laugh it off, but his voice shook. The next morning, Jake was gone. His bunk was empty, his boots still by the door. No one spoke as we ate breakfast. Grady just stared into his coffee, jaw clenched. After that, no one broke the rules. Jake's disappearance changed everything. The camp grew quieter, the laughter faded, and even the old-timers seemed more withdrawn. No one talked about what happened, but everyone felt it. The woods pressed in closer, the shadows seemed darker, and the rules, once a list of oddities, became a lifeline. I found myself watching the forest more closely, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear footsteps crunching in the undergrowth, or a distant whistle that made my skin crawl. I never looked out the window, never answered when I heard my name, and always made sure to be back in camp before sunset. One evening, as I was stacking firewood behind the mess hall, Tom joined me. He worked in silence for a while, then finally spoke. "You're smart, Ethan. You listen. That's why you're still here." I shrugged, not sure what to say. "I just follow the rules." He nodded. "That's all you can do. The forest. It's old. Older than us. Older than the camp. There are things out there that don't care about people. The rules keep us safe. Break them, and you're on your own." I wanted to ask more, but Tom's face closed up, and I knew better than to push. Instead, I asked about the camp's history. "How long has Grady been running this place?" Tom smiled faintly. "As long as anyone can remember. He's seen more than most. Lost more, too. He's the reason we have the rules. Before him, people disappeared all the time. Now it's rare, but it still happens." That night, I sat by the fire with Sarah, the cook. She was peeling potatoes, her hands moving automatically. "Have you ever got used to it?" I asked. She shook her head. "You learn to live with it. The fear, the rules, the way the forest watches you. But you never get used to it." "Not really." She looked at me, her eyes tired. "Have you ever seen the white stag?" I shook my head. "No, just glimpses." "What?" She hesitated. They say it's a warning. If you see it, you're close to something you shouldn't find, or something that's found you. I shivered, remembering the flashes of white I'd seen in the trees. What happens if you follow it? Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. No one comes back. The next day, Grady assigned me to mark trees for the next week's cut. It was a solo job, and I could tell from the way he looked at me that it was a test. I packed my gear, checked my compass, and set out along the marked trail, orange ribbons fluttering in the breeze. The forest was quiet, the only sounds the crunch of my boots and the distant call of a raven. I worked methodically, spraying bright paint on the trunks, making sure to stay within sight of the ribbons. Every so often, I'd stop and listen, heart pounding, certain I was being watched. Around midday, I heard someone calling my name. At first, I thought it was Tom, but the voice was wrong, too high, too far away, echoing through the trees in a way that made my skin crawl. Ethan, Ethan, over here. I froze, remembering the rule. If you hear your name called from the trees, do not answer. The voice came again, closer this time. Ethan, help me. I gripped the can of spray paint, knuckles white, and kept walking, eyes fixed on the next ribbon. The voice faded, replaced by the rustle of wind in the branches. When I got back to camp, Tom was waiting for me. He didn't ask what happened, just clapped me on the shoulder. You did good, he said. You listened. That night, I dreamed of the forest, endless trees, shadows moving just out of sight, a white stag watching me with eyes like polished bone. I woke up sweating, the rules running through my mind like a prayer. The days blurred together. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. The rules became second nature. I never whistled after dark, never left the marked trails, never answered the voices in the trees. Sometimes, I'd see the white stag, always at the edge of my vision, always turning away before I could get a good look. One afternoon, a storm rolled in, dark clouds boiling over the mountains. Grady called everyone into the mess hall, his face grim. Storm's going to be bad, he said. No one leaves camp until it passes. Stay inside, keep the doors locked. If you hear anything outside, ignore it. We huddled in the mess hall as the wind howled and rain lashed the windows. The generator flickered, the lights dimming and brightening in time with the thunder. Someone started to whistle, a nervous habit, and Grady snapped at them to stop. The storm lasted all night. I lay in my bunk, listening to the wind and the distant sound of something knocking on the window. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited for morning. When the sun finally rose, the camp was still standing. But the forest looked different, darker, wilder, as if the storm had woken something up. That day, we found red markings on a tree near the edge of camp. Grady gathered us around, his face pale. No one touches it, he said. We'll cut a new trail tomorrow. I stared at the tree, the red paint bright against the bark. I didn't know who, or what, had marked it, but I knew better than to ask. That night, I added a new rule to my list. Never get comfortable. The forest is always watching. The storm had left the camp on edge. Even the old-timers seemed rattled, and Grady was more short-tempered than usual. The forest felt different, closer, heavier, as if the trees themselves were leaning in to listen. The red-marked tree at the edge of camp became a silent warning, a boundary no one dared cross. The next morning, Grady called a meeting by the fire pit. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed. We're cutting a new trail today, he said. Stay together. No one goes off alone. If you see anything strange, you come back to camp. No exceptions. We nodded, the unspoken fear settling over us like a blanket. I was paired with Tom and Mike, the three of us assigned to clear brush and mark the new path. We worked in silence, the only sounds the rasp of saws and the thud of axes. Every so often, I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the white stag watching from the shadows. Around midday, we stopped for lunch. Mike sat on a fallen log, staring into the trees. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, his voice low. Tom shook his head. "Where would I go? The forest is everywhere." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. The camp had become a strange kind of home, the rules a comfort in a world that made less sense every day. After lunch, we pressed on, the trail winding deeper into the woods. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. I felt the weight of the trees pressing in, the sense that we were being watched. Suddenly, Mike stopped, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" We listened, hearts pounding. At first, I heard nothing but the wind. Then, faintly, a voice, my voice, echoing through the trees. "Ethan, help me." I froze, remembering the rule. Tom grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Don't answer," he whispered. "Just keep moving." We hurried back to camp, the voice fading behind us. When we reached the cabins, Grady was waiting, his face grim. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked. I nodded, my mouth dry. It sounded like me. He sighed. "The forest knows us, knows our fears, our voices. That's why we have the rules." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk, listening to the wind and the distant sound of something moving through the trees. I thought about Jake, about the red-marked tree, about the white stag that always seemed just out of sight. The next day, Grady assigned me to help Sarah in the kitchen. It was a welcome break from the woods, the warmth of the stove and the smell of baking bread a comfort I hadn't realized I missed. As we worked, Sarah told me more about the camp's history. Grady's been here longer than anyone. He lost his brother to the forest years ago. That's when he started the rules. I nodded, kneading dough. "Do you ever think about leaving?" She smiled sadly. "Sometimes. But the forest, it gets in your blood. You leave, but you never really escape." That afternoon, a new delivery arrived, supplies from town, brought in by a driver who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. As he unloaded boxes, he glanced nervously at the trees. "You folks ever get out of here?" he asked. Tom laughed, a harsh sound. "Not as often as we'd like." The driver shook his head. "I wouldn't last a day out here. Too many stories." He left as quickly as he'd come, the sound of his truck fading into the distance. That night, the camp was quiet. Too quiet. I sat by the fire, staring into the flames, the list of rules heavy in my pocket. I thought about the things I'd seen, the voices I'd heard, the way the forest seemed to shift and change when you weren't looking. As the fire burned low, Grady joined me. He sat in silence for a while, then spoke. "You're doing good, Ethan. Most new guys don't last this long." I shrugged. "I just follow the rules." He nodded. "That's all you can do. The forest, it's older than us. Older than this camp. We're just guests here. The rules keep us safe. Break them, and you're on your own." He stood, stretching. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day." I watched him walk back to his cabin, the shadows swallowing him up. I sat by the fire a little longer, listening to the sounds of the night, the wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, the soft, rhythmic knocking that I tried to pretend was just a branch against the window. When I finally went to bed, I dreamed of the white stag, its eyes like polished bone, watching me from the edge of the forest. I woke up sweating, the rules running through my mind like a litany. The next morning, the red-marked tree was gone. In its place was a circle of stones, arranged in a pattern I didn't recognize. Grady called us together, his face pale. "We're moving camp," he said. "Pack your things. We leave at noon." No one argued. We packed quickly, loading our gear onto the trucks. As we drove away, I looked back at the clearing, the circle of stones growing smaller in the distance. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew better than to ask. Moving camp was a massive undertaking. We spent the entire day hauling supplies, dismantling the bunkhouse stove, and loading everything onto battered trucks. The new site was a few kilometers deeper into the forest, along a narrow, muddy track that looked barely wide enough for the vehicles. Grady led the convoy, his jaw set, eyes scanning the tree-line as if expecting something to step out and block our way. The new clearing was smaller, ringed by ancient cedars and thick undergrowth. We set up the cabins and mess hall in a tight circle, the fire pit at the center. The air felt different here, colder, sharper, as if the forest was watching us more closely. No one spoke much as we worked. Even the usual grumbling from Mike and Dave was absent. That night, after a hasty dinner, Grady gathered us around the fire. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, the lines on his face deep in the flickering light. "We moved because the forest told us to," he said quietly. "The stones, the red-marked tree, those are warnings. We don't ignore them. We respect them. That's why we're still here." He looked at each of us in turn. "The rules don't change, no matter where we are. Remember them. Live by them." We nodded, the fire crackling between us. I felt the weight of the rules more than ever, the sense that we were trespassers in a place that barely tolerated our presence. The next morning, work resumed as usual. The new site was even more remote, the trees older and taller, the undergrowth thicker. The marked trails were harder to follow, the orange ribbons sometimes missing or faded. I found myself checking my compass more often, glancing over my shoulder at every snap of a twig. One afternoon, as I was marking trees with Tom, we heard a distant whistle. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. We froze, exchanging a look of fear. "Back to camp," Tom whispered. "Now." We hurried along the trail, hearts pounding. The whistle came again, closer this time, echoing through the trees. I resisted the urge to run, remembering Grady's warning. If you panic, you get lost. If you get lost, you're on your own. We made it back to camp just as the sun dipped below the treetops. Grady was waiting, his face grim. "You heard it?" he asked. We nodded. He sighed. "The forest is restless. Stay close. No one goes out alone." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk, listening to the wind and the distant sound of something moving through the trees. I thought about Jake, about the red-marked tree, about the white stag that always seemed just out of sight. The next day, Grady assigned me to help Sarah with inventory. As we counted cans and checked supplies, she told me more about the camp's past. Years ago, before Grady took over, there was another foreman. He didn't believe in the rules, said they were just stories to scare the new guys. He cut down a red-marked tree, ignoring the warnings. That night, half the camp vanished. No sign, no tracks, nothing. Just gone. She looked at me, her eyes haunted. Grady found the rules in an old journal left by one of the survivors. He's kept us safe ever since. I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me. The rules weren't just superstition, they were survival. That afternoon, a storm rolled in, dark clouds boiling over the mountains. Grady called everyone into the mess hall, his face pale. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock the doors. If you hear anything outside, ignore it. We huddled together as the wind howled and rain lashed the windows. The generator flickered, the lights dimming and brightening in time with the thunder. Someone started to whistle, a nervous habit, and Grady snapped at them to stop. The storm lasted all night. I lay in my bunk, listening to the wind and the distant sound of something knocking on the window. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited for morning. When the sun finally rose, the camp was still standing. But the forest looked different, darker, wilder, as if the storm had woken something up. That day, we found red markings on a tree near the edge of camp. Grady gathered us around, his face pale. "No one touches it," he said. "We'll cut a new trail tomorrow." I stared at the tree, the red paint bright against the bark. I didn't know who, or what, had marked it, but I knew better than to ask. That night, I added a new rule to my list: never get comfortable. The forest is always watching. The days blurred together. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. The rules became second nature. I never whistled after dark, never left the marked trails, never answered the voices in the trees. Sometimes, I'd see the white stag, always at the edge of my vision, always turning away before I could get a good look. One afternoon, as I was marking trees alone, I heard my name called from the woods. The voice was familiar, my mother's, soft and pleading. "Ethan, please, I need your help." I froze, heart pounding. I knew my mother was hundreds of miles away, safe in Vancouver. I gripped the can of spray paint and kept walking, eyes fixed on the next ribbon. The voice faded, replaced by the rustle of wind in the branches. When I got back to camp, Tom was waiting for me. He didn't ask what happened, just clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good," he said. "You listened." That night, I dreamed of the forest, endless trees, shadows moving just out of sight, a white stag watching me with eyes like polished bone. I woke up sweating, the rules running through my mind like a prayer. The forest's grip on us only tightened as the weeks passed. The new camp felt even more isolated, the trees older and thicker, the sky barely visible through the tangled canopy. The rules were no longer just a list in my pocket. They were a shield, a ritual, a way to keep the fear at bay. One evening, as dusk settled over the camp, Grady called me aside. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with worry. "I need you to check the north trail," he said. "One of the ribbons is missing. Take Tom with you. Be quick and be back before dark." I nodded, grabbing my jacket and flashlight. Tom met me by the edge of camp, his expression grim. "Let's move," he said. "No time to waste." We set off along the narrow path, the forest closing in around us. The air was thick with the scent of moss and wet earth, the only sounds our footsteps and the distant call of a raven. We found the missing ribbon a few hundred yards in, torn from the branch and lying in the mud. Tom frowned. "That's not wind or animals. Something took it down." We retied the ribbon and started back, moving faster as the light faded. Halfway to camp, we heard it, a soft, melodic whistle drifting through the trees. It was beautiful and haunting, the kind of sound that made you want to follow. Tom grabbed my arm, his grip iron. "Don't listen. Keep walking." We hurried on, the whistle growing louder, closer. I felt a strange pull, a longing to step off the trail and find the source. But I kept my eyes on the path, repeating the rules in my head like a mantra. When we finally burst into the clearing, the camp was a welcome sight. Grady was waiting, relief etched on his face. "You made it," he said. "Good." That night, the crew was restless. The fire burned low, and the usual stories were replaced by uneasy silence. Even Sarah, usually the heart of the camp, seemed withdrawn. After dinner, I sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Tom joined me, his face pale. "You ever wonder what's out there?" he asked quietly. "All the time," I admitted. He nodded. "I think the forest is alive. Not just the trees and animals, but something older, something that remembers." I shivered, thinking of the voices, the white stag, the red-marked trees. "Do you think it wants us gone?" Tom shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it just wants us to follow the rules, to respect it." We sat in silence, the fire crackling between us. The next day, Grady announced that we'd be sending a crew deeper into the woods to scout a new cutting area. He chose me, Tom, and Mike for the job. "Stay together," he warned. "Don't leave the trail. And if anything feels wrong, come back." We set out early, the forest damp and silent. The trail wound through ancient cedars, the ground soft with moss. We marked trees as we went, the spray paint bright against the dark bark. A few hours in, we came across a clearing. In the center stood a massive, ancient tree, its trunk twisted and scarred. Red markings circled the base, fresh and vivid. Mike stepped forward, curiosity getting the better of him. "What do you think did this?" Tom grabbed his arm. "Don't touch it. Remember the rules." We skirted the clearing, giving the tree a wide berth. As we moved on, I felt eyes on my back, the sense that something was watching from the shadows. The trail grew harder to follow, the ribbons spaced farther apart. The forest seemed to shift around us, the trees closing in, the light fading faster than it should. Suddenly, Mike stumbled, cursing. I lost my compass. We searched the ground, but it was gone. Tom checked his watch, his face tight with worry. "We need to head back." Now, we retraced our steps, but the trail was different. The ribbons were gone, the trees unfamiliar. Panic set in as we realized we were lost. "Stay where you are and wait for help," I whispered, remembering the rule. We huddled together, backs to a fallen log, flashlights cutting weak beams through the gloom. The forest was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. After what felt like hours, we heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming closer. A shape emerged from the trees, the white stag, its antlers gleaming in the dim light. It stared at us, eyes like polished bone. I felt a strange calm, a sense that we were being judged. Tom squeezed my shoulder. "Don't move. Don't follow." The stag turned and vanished into the trees. Moments later, we heard voices, Grady and Sarah, calling our names. We shouted back, relief flooding through us. They found us a few minutes later, guided by our shouts. Back at camp, Grady listened to our story, his face grave. "The forest let you go," he said. "Remember that." That night, I lay awake. The image of the white stag burned into my mind. I understood, finally, that the rules weren't just for safety. They were a pact, a way to coexist with something ancient and powerful. The next morning, a new hire arrived, a young guy named Ben, eager and full of questions. Grady handed him the list of rules, his eyes serious. "Read them, memorize them, and don't let anyone tell you they're just stories." I watched Ben's face as he read, saw the disbelief, the nervous laugh. I wondered how long it would take for him to understand. As the days passed, I became the one who watched the forest, who warned the new guys, who followed the rules without question. The fear never left, but it became a part of life, a reminder that we were guests in a place that could swallow us whole. The weeks slipped by, each day a repetition of the last. Work, eat, sleep, and always the rules. I watched Ben the way Tom and Grady had once watched me, waiting to see if he'd listen, if he'd last. He asked questions, joked about the rules, but I saw the fear in his eyes when the sun dipped behind the trees and the shadows grew long. One evening, as dusk settled over the camp, I found Ben sitting by the fire, the list of rules clutched in his hand. He looked up at me, his face pale. "Do you really believe all this?" he asked. I sat beside him, staring into the flames. I didn't at first, but the forest doesn't care what you believe. It only cares if you follow the rules. He nodded, folding the paper and slipping it into his pocket. I heard something last night, knocking on my window. I almost looked. I put a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing. That's how it starts. Curiosity, doubt. That's what the forest wants." We sat in silence, the fire crackling between us, the woods whispering just beyond the circle of light. I realized then that I'd become part of the cycle, one more link in a chain of warnings, stories, and survival. As the night deepened, I watched Ben head to his cabin, the rules in his pocket, the fear in his eyes. I knew I'd be waiting for him at dawn, hoping he'd make it through the night. In these woods, the rules aren't just for safety. They're the only thing keeping us alive. And the forest never forgets.